This is The Second Studio, hosted by the Design and Architecture Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonnet. This week, our guest is Eddie Jones.
Eddie is the founder and principal of Jones Studio, an architecture office based in Tempe, Arizona.
Yes, it is. And with Eddie, we talk about how he became interested in being an architect at the age of 6, apparently. So we talk about his life story, of course, as you know, their practice, and also some of their work, even more specifically, their land ports of entry projects. And he goes into detail about the design of those projects, their social meaning, what they do differently about them, and the story of how they won their first projects. And just as usual, we cover all different types of things. Eddie, as you'll hear, is a very, very passionate person. He loves his job. He works with his brother, which is interesting too. And all around, it's a great conversation. And I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Sponsors.
If you're starting to laser scan your renovation projects for accurate as-builts, a client at some point has probably handed you some wonky CAD drawings from 17 years ago. Enter Integrated Projects, or IPX for short. IPX is a scan-to-BIM platform that converts your 3D point cloud file from any major LiDAR camera into standardized BIM and CAD files. The best part is that their website lays out the price and turnaround time instantly. Start that interior renovation project on the 50-yard line with accurate drawings in 3D and 2D. Click the IPX link in our show notes to get your first instant quote.
Designers and architects, if you're looking for a powerful real-time visualization and VR tool, then check out Enscape. Enscape is super easy to use because it's a plugin and not a standalone application, which means you can directly work in your SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Rhino, Vectorworks, or Revit model. In fact, it only takes a couple of clicks from installation to creating your first rendering. Enscape does realistic renderings, 360-degree panoramas and videos, and virtual reality environments. We use Enscape in our office, we love it, and we think you will too. So click the Enscape 3D link in our show notes to learn more. Second Studio Podcast is made possible by the support from Autodesk.
Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that helps architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire.
Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders.
The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. You can learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in the episode notes.
This is the Second Studio, hosted by myself, Marina, and our guest, Eddie Jones. Here we go. What was it like growing up where you grew up? What was your childhood home like?
Well, uninteresting, which is a good thing, I guess, when you're a kid. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, but because my father was a petroleum engineer, we were always going where the oil production was. And so quickly we ended up moving to Oklahoma, where essentially I was raised from pre-kindergarten through college at Oklahoma State University is where I got my Bachelor of Architecture degree. And you know, growing up in Oklahoma in the 60s, everything was somewhere else. Everybody else was having all the fun, but nothing was happening in Oklahoma. And that's okay. That's okay. It was a very innocent childhood, sheltered, I would have to admit, but my parents were always very supportive. I became interested in architecture at a very early age. I've told the story many times, and it sounds like a cliche now, but my father had bought the entire 26-volume set of the Encyclopedia Britannica from a door-to-door salesman when I was, I think, in first grade.
That is such a 19th century thing.
Well, that was the internet. That was as good as it got.
Yeah.
But I was fortunately born with curiosity, and I went through every single page of that entire set of encyclopedias, and inevitably I got to the W's, the WXYZ volume, which was a combined WXYZ, and it was the thinnest of all the volumes.
Yeah.
But then you get to the page on Orville and Wilbur Wright, which I knew, and then there was this grainy black and white photo that measured about I still have the volume. That's why I can say this, about 2 inches wide and 1 inch tall. And it was a black and white photograph of a house that I learned was called Falling Water. And of course, the article or the inclusion was about Frank Lloyd Wright, who I'd never heard of. I didn't even care. I was just mesmerized by the photograph. And back in the 50s, my mother subscribed to women's magazines, which were very progressive, believe it or not. And they, especially when it came to the modern movement, and many of these magazines would publish modern houses, mostly in California. You know, it was post World War II, and America was full of optimism. And I would pick up her magazines, and there would be a floor plan. Didn't know it's called a floor plan, but that's what it was. And then there would be photographs. And I would spend hours, and remember, I'm still in elementary school. I would spend hours figuring out where in that floor plan, that diagram, that strange drawing, that two-dimensional drawing, where those photographs would have to have been taken, because I could distinguish between a glass wall and a solid wall, you know, single line,
Yeah.
bold line. And I didn't know it, but I was training myself to be an architect, right? To see in 3 dimension. And at some point, my parents probably said, well, you know, Eddie, you probably want to be an architect. Okay. How do you spell it? But so from about 6 years old, I knew what I wanted to be. And it wasn't a casual motivation. I mean, I loved architecture. I just loved everything about it. And I, of course, I didn't realize what a huge responsibility it is or how difficult it is. I just knew that you know, I could distinguish between a mediocre space and an exciting space. So that being driven or answering the call, whatever you want to call it, you know, allowed me to choose class as early as junior high school. You know, I had a choice of taking a mechanical drawing course. I don't know if you've ever heard of such thing called mechanical drawing, but back in the day, technical drawings were produced with T-squares, drafting boards, and triangles and scales. And so I took my first mechanical drawing course in junior high school. And again, it was like, it had to be the same feeling a musician gets when they first are able to produce something coherent, you know, on an instrument. And I was hooked. And again, as I was so young, I thought, well, if I can draw really well, then I will be a good architect. But it, you know, there's something to be said about that, I guess. And I to this day, I still love drawing by hand. I produce all of our renderings at Jones Studio by hand. Of course,
Really?
we do, you know, get the professional, super realistic drawings when required, but they can't beat my hand renderings. And
So
and I
the hand renderings, break it down for the listeners. So what are you using to do the hand renderings? Like
well,
what?
I use tracing paper and colored pencils and markers and sometimes paint, you know, whatever it takes to make the drawing sparkle and exude the kind of spirit that I want to embed in the architecture. And
I
I
like
don't
that.
stop until I feel like it's communicating that well.
I like that. Whatever it takes. Actually, to be
Mhm.
honest, that's a pretty good description of what architects do in general. It's
Yeah,
whatever it takes to get this
yeah,
thing done, to get it realized.
yeah.
You were talking about using T-squares and triangles and things like that. And as part of our research for this recording, of course, we visited your website, and there's a video of you and your brother, which is very
Mhm.
lovely. And you're using a Mayline in the video, and I'm very
Yeah.
curious. Do you still use a Mayline?
Yes,
Do
David,
you
I still
really?
use it. It's the only one. No, I take that back. It's not the only one in the studio. It's the only permanent. My desk actually is tilted with the Mayline.
Yeah.
And Brian and Sean, they have little portable drafting boards with
That's cool.
built-in Maylines, and they have a beautiful hand and again value the art of hand drawing. And by the way, the guys, men and women that are on CAD here, the best ones were educated with a pencil first. They
That's
understand
interesting.
the value of line weights and the contrast of a bold stroke versus a very light
Yeah.
line. And
That's a really interesting thing that you say. So, yeah, I mean, I can see where that would make a very big difference. We kind of, when we were in school, we were right on the edge of when everything was converting to entirely computers.
Mhm,
But the school that I went to, we didn't quite make that transition when I started. So the
mhm,
first year was all analog, and then the
mhm,
second year was actually all analog too, if I'm being honest, except for like a few CAD courses separate from
mhm,
studio.
mhm,
So we started by using May lines and triangles
mhm.
and rapidographs, even just for more but for fun in the case of rapidographs and different leads and stuff like that, which in a way sounds very archaic and sounds
Mhm.
silly that why would you
It's
do that? But
please, you're talking to me.
but for you, I'm sure it doesn't. But
No,
even
it's
though so
natural.
yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing. Like even though like our experience with those tools is very brief compared to
Hmm.
yours,
Yeah.
um, I can understand what you're saying. There's just a fluidity to working by hand, and so but you do
There's more
perceive
conscious decisions made, I think.
conscious
Yeah,
decisions.
when you use a tool that requires you to make the decision more directly than through the mouse of the computer.
You're right. Right.
It's like, I mean, it's like photography. I feel like,
Mhm.
if you've experienced like film photography versus digital photography, they're very different, and your understanding of the image and the color and the light and the shadow is not the same thing as if you play around with
Hmm.
film.
Yes. And don't forget the joy part.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I find peace and joy whenever I am at one with my drafting board. I disappear into the paper, and it talks back, and it tells me what it needs, and I comply.
And I comply. I like that.
Mhm.
Um, that's super interesting. There is definitely something nice about the drafting table and the triangle, and do it's I don't know. It's just it's easier. The computer's a very fussy tool, to be honest. Even if you're very good at it, it's still very fussy. And I like your specific point about the line weights. It's a
Yeah.
very detailed and small thing, but I think it's
Mhm.
also really significant because you can't do that in a computer. I mean, you can do it with an
No.
iPad. We're kind of getting there with those kinds of machines, but a line of computer is just a perfect thin hairline. It's not doesn't
Well,
have weight, angle.
well, it can. I mean, again, I'm very proud of the CAD drawings that we produce here. I'll put them up against anybody's, but in a way, they're all the same.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
every time you plot a drawing, it is a brand new drawing. It
mm,
doesn't have the history of what's gone before. And you talk about the value of line weights. Well, there's also the value of the line, the impression in a piece of tracing paper that once was a line but was erased. And then when my hand brushes across the graphite and creates a grayscale,
mhm,
unintentionally, but it's there. It becomes kind of human, it takes on a life of its own.
mhm.
And again, I think that's where the joy comes from. I can sit back at when I have when the drawing allows me to say you're done. I can sit back and I can objectively appreciate what has happened. I can admire it without feeling like it's all mine. It now belongs to the universe. Now, we're getting way too
I was gonna say
esoteric
you
here.
sound like a crazy person. No, but I do understand.
I
what
need to
you're
be alone.
saying.
I need a
You
moment.
sound crazy
let's
for right
okay,
now.
you're in a completely red box, so maybe that has to do with. But I think I understand what you're saying, and I think actually a lot of architects, especially the ones who do like drawing, do understand what you're talking about. And it's an odd thing. I think with design in general, there's a point in the process where the projects sort of take a life on their own in a good way.
Mhm.
And it's almost like you just have, at least I feel this way, that I just have to let it be what it wants to be and help it get there and sort of not get in the way.
Yeah.
And you can kind of
Well,
feel it.
I have a suggestion. Billy Shin wrote the most beautiful, poetic essay about the art of slowness. And she uses drawing as the vehicle to discuss that. And you'll love it. It says it so much better than I can.
To check it out. So, from a super young age, you know, architecture is the path. You're infatuated with it. You go to
Mhm.
school to study it. And your brother is also an architect.
How
Mhm.
did that happen?
Did he's
Did you
older,
convince
younger?
him?
He's 6 years younger than I am.
Okay.
Wow.
And
Oh, so you're to blame. That's why he's the architect.
yes, that's a good word for it. But we talked about, we're brothers, we're kids, we're running around the house. We're talking about, God, wouldn't it be fun to have a firm? Someday us working together as a firm. Yeah, sure. But and we did. It's as simple as that. We did. Now, to Neil's credit, he 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 never wanted to compete with me in terms of my passion for design and problem solving, but he intuitively knew that architecture is a business and one of us was going to have to figure out how to run a
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
So after he graduated from Oklahoma State also with a Bachelor of Architecture, he was one of the first students at the University of Illinois to take their it was a double degree program. You could get a master's in architecture and a master's in business at the same time. And he obtained one of the first degrees. I think there's several universities in the country that offer that program now, but he was one of the first. And thank God he did that because, you know, I've known so many brilliant young people and friends, colleagues when I was fellow students that were gifted, and but the business of architecture just chewed them up and spit them out,
Yeah.
and they burned out, and it's a shame. And it would probably have done the same to me had it not been for Neil, taking the business part of it seriously. And if any students listen to this program, I highly recommend that they either marry a business person or
Have a brother.
befriend
Yeah.
or have a family member they can
Yeah.
coax into going into business. Makes all the difference. I mean, it's one thing to be devoted to excellence and concentrate and be committed, but it's another to fulfill that payroll responsibility every month too. And so he has done very well. Jones Studio is a very financially successful firm because we take the business seriously. I still suck at it. I mean, as old as I am, I can't make my mouth form the words to respond to what's your fee. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's embarrassing. I'm an old hippie from the 60s, and money was materialistic and it was bad and it's
Yeah.
corrupt you. And damn, that was the worst education I got, was having that kind of impression.
It's interesting you say that because
Yeah.
I feel like like our generation and maybe like the one that followed us
Mhm.
are very in tune with the fact that we have to be better at talking about fees, talking to clients, explaining, our business and be better at doing business because it's kind of a necessity. We can't
Yes,
just,
yes, it is.
we can't just design for fun anymore. It just
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Well, some good news. If you have somebody, running the business, then you still get to have fun. And I feel guilty. I mean, Neil has taken all the bullets for 45 years. He's taken the bullets. And if you saw my desk, I've got crayons, I've got colored pencils, I've got tape and glue and paintbrushes, and it's like kindergarten class. And here I am getting to talk to you. I'm getting to have all the fun. Neil's in the office, probably filling out payroll checks.
Yeah, he's having fun with Excel sheet. And
Oh yeah, those
Yeah.
are lots of fun.
But it is a really, really good point, and I think I agree with Marita. There's a little bit of a generational gap in general when it comes to those things, because there used to be a sense of, I think more in your generation, Eddie, the sense of security. The mentality was much more that, and it was true that you could find a good job, do good work, be a good person, and then retire, everything's stable, and you have a house and a car and a white picket fence if you want to go that far.
That was my parents' generation.
Your parents, and then it tapered off, quite quickly.
We pretty much screwed everything up for you guys. I'm publicly apologize for that.
Yeah. I've heard the same thing actually from folks your age who have told us that. I'm like,
And we were going to save the world, and look what happened yesterday. Maybe there's some good news out there. We'll see.
So your brother, did he also go to the same school as you for architecture?
To Oklahoma State University. That's in Stillwater, Oklahoma. There are two universities in Oklahoma: Oklahoma State and OU, University of Oklahoma. Now, everyone assumes I went to OU because that was Bruce Goff's school. Do you know who Bruce Goff was?
No. Is he?
Oh man. That's your second assignment after this, is to Google Bruce Goff, a great 20th century architect. And he was one of the few people I have ever known that sustained a childlike imagination through his entire life.
Wow.
And his work reflects that. And he put OU on the international map in terms of quality of students, quality of education, School of Architecture. He had a completely different approach than all the other universities did around the world. And it was a brief shining moment that Bruce Goff was at OU, and there were several very, very good architects that came out of that school. Again, you probably don't know the name Herb Green. That's the third person you need to Google. And probably Fay Jones. You know that name, Fay Jones?
No, but I'm looking at Bruce's work. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, look, especially study the Bavinger House. Probably the most unique house ever designed in America. It's a Nautilus spiral.
Everything. Bavinger?
Bavinger, Bavinger. And all the spaces were suspended. The roof was suspended from a single drill collar. And now that's an oil field term. It's a drill pipe. And being in Oklahoma, Goff was the master of scavenging material and finding the beauty in anything. He could turn an ashtray into an emerald just by changing the context.
Yeah.
So, but my point is, my personality should have taken me to OU, but I went to Oklahoma State University. And to this day, the School of Architecture is in the College of Engineering. Again, my father was an engineer. He says, Eddie, you should go to OSU because you'll get a good engineering foundation. Well, he was right. That was a good move. Because again, to this day, my approach to architecture is disciplined by the engineering component. Whether we're talking about structural engineering, mechanical engineering, or electrical engineering, I'm very aware of the implications of my design decisions across the engineering spectrum. And I think, honestly, I think it's maybe better.
Huh.
But that's why both Neil and I ended up at Oklahoma State. Now, I was satisfied getting a Bachelor of Architecture. I'm ready to go. Okay, I've got my degree. I'm going to, work for a firm, and get my 3 years of apprenticeship, done, and then I'll take the licensing exam. And I worked in Oklahoma City for a year, but earlier in the conversation, I talked about how everything was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I was becoming frustrated and restless, perhaps is a better word. I had just had my son Christopher, and Mary was restless too. And here was this land called Arizona that Frank Lloyd Wright had chosen, Paolo Soleri had chosen. Do you know the name Paolo Soleri?
Yeah.
Yeah, we visited
Okay.
Arco Santi a year
Okay,
ago.
good.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Yeah, that's wild stuff.
It's great original architecture. And but I thought, well, gosh, if the Arizona's attracted them, maybe it would attract me. And then I got a copy of Arizona Highways. It's a magazine. I think it's still published. Best PR for a state that was ever invented. And they would have these beautiful photographs of sunsets with saguaros silhouetted against the amber skies. And it's like, damn, this is like another planet. So in August of all the months, my wife and I packed up the Volkswagen Beetle,
Oh, no.
and we drove to Arizona with our portfolios. We drove to Phoenix, and I got 5 job offers in 1973.
Mm.
And I chose the one that that said they would pay my moving expenses. I mean, that's not a
Wow.
very good reason, I guess, but when you're poor, I
Yeah,
guess
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
good
Yeah.
reason. And it happened to be the oldest existing architecture firm in Arizona. It's called Lesher Mahoney, and Les Mahoney was still alive. His license number was like 4. Mine is 10,000 and something, and now it's probably
4.
30,000. His was 4. And he knew Barry Goldwater, he knew Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, it was
That's
a
crazy.
wild time. And there was a firm out of Omaha called Dana Larson and Rubel, which is now called DLR, and their bread and butter work was doing the housing and urban development Indian housing program. And so Arizona has many tribes, and Native American tribes. And so they bought Lesher Mahoney just as I arrived. And they bought a Nikon camera and handed it to me. And this is like the first week of moving to Arizona. And they said, go around to all the reservations and photograph the buildings. What a great way to learn about my state, vernacular architecture, what materials were appropriate and worked, and the techniques for producing shade and survival, without electricity. And I went to all 4 corners of the state doing that for months and months. I did that. I look back on that and I thought, what luck, what cloud am I living under that gives me the good fortune to say yes to a job like that I had no idea I would get this incredible education very early. But as fun as all of that was, and I became director of design, and they made me an associate in the firm, but it was not satisfying work. I'm not talking about the affordable Indian housing. I'm just talking about all the other work we did. And the firm was very siloed. I would design it, really like what I did, and then it would go to the production department and become less recognizable. And then by the time it went to the construction department, the buildings were dead. That was my feeling. That there was a
Yeah.
heartbeat when they left my desk, and they were dead once they were built.
Yeah.
Rather than complaining about that, I thought, well, it's their firm. They're responsible for everything that comes out. If I want to do what I want to do, then I have to start my own firm.
Hmm.
And I wasn't even 30 yet. And I had been in Arizona for about 5 years. And I had taken the exams. Now, back then, of course, we went to the School of Architecture, and for 2 weekends, 8 hours a day, that's 32 hours of testing. Cruel, but that's how the architectural exams were given. I got the envelope, I opened it, and I had passed everything except I had failed design.
Well, that's
But it's like that's okay. I'm pretty sure I can pass that next time. I won't be so fussy, over my solution. And of course, we had to wait a year, and then I took it and passed it. And once I had my license, this again, coincidentally, or maybe cosmically, my wife lost her job, so we had just bought a Jensen Healy sports car. Now we couldn't afford the sports car, so we had to sell it. The man that bought that sports car, Chuck Tatham was his name, he said, "So you're an architect?" I wasn't yet, technically, but I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Well, we just bought some property. Maybe you could design our house." I go, "Sure." And so I did. And because I had a real job, and I had moonlighted before. Are you familiar with the term moonlighting?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had made a practice of that, and I didn't advertise it. I don't know if my bosses would have approved or not, but I wasn't going to, give them the opportunity. But anyway, so I had a real job. And of course, it bid over budget. It was a 7,500 square foot house on the side of a hill, and the bids came in 1979 at $150,000, and that was over budget.
Wow.
And so Chuck said, "Well, why don't you and I build it ourselves?" Well, I'd worked in the oil fields growing up, and I'd never built anything other than forts in the backyard. But I said, "Sure." And so I became a general contractor without even knowing
No kidding.
it. Yeah. And it was a great experience. Again, you learn so much in school, then you learn so much out of school. And I'm still learning. I mean, it's my favorite thing. I'm more hungry now for knowledge than I was back then. But I'll quickly get through this story because it influenced the rest of my career. Because the house was on a hill, we needed retaining walls. Therefore, the house was made of concrete block, 8 inches by 8 inches by 16 inches. I'm sure you're familiar with concrete block. And I didn't know how to mix mortar, not to mention lay up a masonry wall. And so I thought, well, they're all the same size, and it's a retaining wall, so I'm going to have to grout it solid anyway. I'll just dry stack the block. Easy. Well, not all block are the same size. And when you're going up 13 feet, the slightest variation in height starts to gain,
Yeah.
and by the third course, I was in real trouble. But I'm resourceful, and I figured out how I could shim each course and get a plumb and level wall. And so we did this huge house out of dry stacked block. It's still there today. I bet I couldn't even get a permit for that today. And by the way, it was 8 sheets of paper. And I got my license by then. I'd received my license, and I had stamped I stamped the the civil, grading and drainage, the architecture, the structural, the electrical, mechanical. I did it all.
Yeah.
8 sheets of paper, got a permit in 2 weeks for this unusually constructed house. And it's been downhill ever since.
I was going to say, I was going to ask you, like seriously, though, do you think that, you know, I think it's easy to kind of over romanticize the past in a sense, but I do wonder if you think that the way that architecture was done at that point in time, let's talk about the construction costs, the feasibility, the ease of permitting, the ease of construction documents, the more design build approach in that case, because you were building it, but also I think back then things were closer to design build in general. Do you think all of that was better or allowed for more interesting and different architecture and more good architecture as opposed to now? Because I do feel like sometimes there's so much stuff to do.
Yeah.
And there's so many restrictions. The cost is high, and the sheets are high. Like everything's just more.
Yeah.
And I feel like it A, sucks the life out of a lot of architects, and B, just prohibits and limits the amount of architecture, good architecture that can be produced.
Well, that's a good conversation. You can probably tell I still love my job. I will be doing it forever. Even as we transfer our stock ownership to our young partners, I will still be working at Jones Studio until the day I drop dead, because it brings me so much joy. Everything about architecture is wonderful, except having to interact with bureaucrats, and I include HOAs with that bureaucracy. And I agree with you that all of those layers of, can I say bullshit on the radio?
Yeah.
Okay.
You've said worse things.
All those layers tend to inhibit creativity, and they take a lot of energy and a lot of time, and therefore a lot of money from our clients. And it just makes it harder, and it's so unnecessary. I have yet to have a plan checker make my building better. And it's caused me to, I guess I have to use the word cheat, because, you know, I'm tired of arguing.
Yeah.
You just tell me what you want on the plans. I'll put it on the plans. Just tell me and I'll do it. And I do it. It doesn't matter to me, because after I get a certificate of occupancy, I'm going to go back and fix everything. And I literally do that.
Yeah.
If I don't want an exit sign there, I'm not going to have an exit sign.
And I think a lot of architects do. I mean, you know, like
railings is another one.
Oh yeah.
You see out there.
Oh,
Don't meet code.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't even use them at all. I mean, on my personal projects, my house, there's a 9-foot drop. It's, you know, it's architects like Luis Barragan and that beautiful wooden stair. I mean, God, you know, it ruined me. Ray Cappy's house ruined me. Paul Rudolph ruined me.
Even Falling Water, we had visited that house a number of years ago, and I don't know if you visited it, but the first thing you notice,
of course I visited.
Of course. What do I say? But one of the first things I noticed when you're on that balcony, I'm like, this is not even close to being the height that we've required now. And of course, let's say if you were to redraw or rebuild Falling Water to meet current code, it would be not as good, not even close.
Even the Guggenheim, if you walk out on the balcony outside the cafe, I mean, the David and Gladys Wright House in Phoenix, beautiful masterpiece. That's the spiraling curvilinear concrete block house that was almost demolished. The railings on that maybe hit just below my knee.
Yeah.
But which is why I love working in Mexico. You know, I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just all about proportion. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm an irresponsible architect. I'm very careful about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I want to make people safe, but I also have a lot of respect for people knowing what to do.
Yeah. So you start your own office at the age of
Oh,
29. Yeah.
could I say a little more about that? Because, we were talking about how all of these layers of bullshit are inhibiting creativity. In Arizona, in Phoenix in particular, and I'd have to include Tucson in that, we are blessed with many choices of excellent general contractors. And the common denominator between these excellent general contractors and other contractors is these guys are all architects. And their superintendents at least have a degree in architecture.
Mhm.
Really?
And when I work with those firms, it is a completely different experience than when I have to work with a large general contractor or a conventional general contractor. I'll put it that way. It's so much easier. It's so much more fun. The conversations are so different. It's about how can we both know what the intent of this detail is. How can we make it better, more efficient, which translates into cost effectiveness, and it always ends up translating into elegance and beauty. Imagine having that kind of conversation with a general contractor or any of the subcontractors. But
So
we
we need
have that opportunity in Arizona.
Yeah.
so we need more architects to go into being
It's
general
happening for sure. It's
contractors.
happening for
Yeah,
various
yeah.
reasons.
We need just need
Well,
more.
well, we need more architects in politics too. We need more
I
architects,
agree.
uh, as community activists.
Yeah.
Well, I've said this actually many times before, and I've always made a disclaimer that maybe it sounds a bit self-serving or egomaniacal in a sense because I am an architect and I'm part of the community.
Mhm,
But I agree with what you just said for
mhm,
both contractors, but also politics and public policy and positions of like serious power. I
mhm.
think it would be a great thing if more folks who were trained as architects and maybe even practiced as architects went into those sectors because again, I realize I am an architect, so I'm super biased probably, but
Mm,
the education of an architect is a very unique thing. And at
absolutely.
least my education from most of the architects I speak with, and I'm sure it's the same for you, it's a very diverse and wide-reaching
Yeah,
perspective that you have
yeah.
when you're being educated and when you're practicing. And I
Mhm,
think that's the thing that, let's say, the average person doesn't quite know about architects is that if you look at a practicing architect who has a very small practice and they just do houses, not
mhm.
not giant mega mansion houses, but just nice simple houses, very likely the way that architect sees their work is within the context of like culture at large,
Mhm.
which is not what people think. It's like, oh, you just draw nice houses, but the architect is thinking much wider than that. We're trained to think that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
But
I,
so anyway, so
and we're very lucky, aren't we? I
yeah.
could certainly consider myself lucky. I love the education of an architect. I think it is the best education available anywhere. And why is that? Well, it's because we're trained in the arts and we're trained in engineering, and then we live where those two things come together. And so we all we want to do is solve problems. That's what gets us off, is solving problems, which translates into objectivity. Now, what better leader is there than the objective leader that just wants to solve the problem and disregard all the surrounding agendas?
Hmm.
I really think that we're a community's best resource and the most underutilized resource. I'm trying
It's
to change that, by the way, in Phoenix, but.
good
I
for
think
you.
you should run for president. You will get
Oh,
my
yeah.
vote.
Good
That's for
reference.
sure.
Wow,
They'll
just leap
eat
over
me
all the
alive.
generations, get straight for
Shortcut,
presidency.
yeah, they just shortcut straight to the top, like no, you're right. You're right. And I think that's also something that we try to encourage in our, episodes when students are listening to some of those episodes that we're doing is that architecture doesn't have to end up being about design in the professional field,
Mhm,
like there is many outcomes after the education. So don't give
mhm,
up during
mhm.
your 5-6 year program, like just go to the end and then you can choose whatever path is best for you. Not everybody has to be a designer.
Yeah, true.
Well, let me give you an example of how I'm trying, or I am not trying, I am moving Jones Studio to the front or to a seat at the table of the public policy table. I mentioned earlier, I think before we were on camera, that one of the most impactful building types we do are land ports of entry. They're the gateways in the United States. If you're arriving by car or walking or bicycle or bus, you're going from a different country. Now, remember, there's not just Mexico on the southern border. There is Canada and the northern border. All we ever hear about is the southern border because that has a lot of drama associated to it. But the Canadian border, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's the longest country-to-country border in the world.
Oh.
And there is no barrier. And it's because, in my theory, I think we have compatible cultures. We have especially compatible economies, compatible skin color too. And then you have Mexico with their economy struggles and is certainly at the mercy of ours. And it's just such an easy target for politicians to beat up on poor people that have no voice. It gets them elected all the time. And again, I don't know if you hear all of the rhetoric. It's campaign season, as you know, so there's a lot of campaigning, using border security as a brickbat. It happens every election cycle. It's been happening ever since I got to Arizona. And just yesterday, well, actually, it was last weekend, I wrote an editorial opinion, they call them op-eds, for the Arizona Republic, and they published it. And it was, I was finally saying it out loud. We do not have a security crisis on the southern border. People need to quit saying it. And so I talked about all of my experiences. I mean, I am on the border. If I'm not, one of my guys is. And we've been down there since 2008. And never, ever have we witnessed a crisis or a surge or an invasion or a caravan.
Caravan, I was just going to say. Yeah, the caravan.
And they're always peaceful.
Yeah.
And so I thought somebody needs to let people know that this rhetoric is just a fundraising tool. And then I thought naively that people will be relieved to find out that there's not an invasion.
Oh boy.
Just stir the pot right there.
Yeah. Well, so far nobody's threatened to kill me yet, but anyway, I wish, because we can be objective, we, I think, have a certain obligation to step forward and speak the truth. And then that op-ed got me a segment on NPR, a local NPR station, talking about it. And so I got to talk about it some more. And that was 2 days ago. And now I'm talking about it again. So, architects, doesn't everybody have a social responsibility? Regardless of the profession, even if you're digging ditches, there's I don't know, I feel like I have a responsibility to my community to make it better, or at least prevent it from getting worse. And I've just, maybe it's because of my age, and I have nothing to prove, and I'm not afraid of losing anything, and therefore I can speak my mind and not be distracted by the consequences.
But that's a good place to be at.
Yeah, it's liberating.
And now, a little break for our show sponsors. I used to start remodeling projects with hours of tedious measuring and recreating the existing conditions. And then I discovered Canvas, which is an iPad app and iPhone app that lets me easily scan entire homes in minutes and automatically generates editable models in format like SketchUp, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, and more in as little as 1 day. Get to the design phase faster with Canvas. Visit canvas.io/SSP to schedule your demo and to get your first as-built free. Say goodbye to design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project, from mood boards to advanced specification tools to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly errors. Share your work in a format that works for you, be it PDF, spec sheets, or online, branded client dashboards with always up-to-date specification details. Join Interior Design Movers and Shakers and start for free by clicking the Programma link in our show notes. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for interior design workflows. Are you interested in a computer program that combines construction drawings and 3D modeling in one software and one model? Well, if so, you should check out the program ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architecture and interior design firms around the world to 3D design supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. As ArchiCAD continues to evolve with technological advances, architects can push that technology to their advantage while working in an accurate model. You can start your free, fully functioning trial today by clicking the ArchiCAD link in our episode notes.
So the land ports of entry is one of the things you mentioned as part of this last part of the conversation. And you guys have done a few of these now. Can you talk us through some of those projects that you did specifically, and also what about them makes them so interesting to you?
Okay. And to your younger audience that are architects, I want to begin by how it happened in the first place. The General Service Administration, there was a great senator, Patrick Moynihan from New York, who became sort of fed up with the buildings that the federal government was building. You know, every city needs a federal office building, and the emphasis was on, this is taxpayer money. Therefore they have to be bare bones buildings. Well, these are by nature very large buildings, and you put a very large dumb building in the middle of a city block, and it kills everything around it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what our government was doing, killing city blocks. And Moynihan recognized that, and he sat down and he wrote 5 design guideline principles that should be applied to any federal project. And they called it the Design Excellence Program. Have you ever heard that term, the Design Excellence Program?
Design Excellence Program. No, out of New York?
No, it's a federal government GSA program, General Service Administration program, and land ports of entry fall under that Design Excellence Program, as well as federal buildings and federal courthouses, to name a few. And so part of the process of this program is having peer reviews. And back in 2004, I got a call from a staff member from the General Service Administration saying that I had been selected to be a peer reviewer, a national peer reviewer. I didn't know what that is. I didn't even know what GSA stood for, but it sounded like a great opportunity and something that I should say yes to, which is my nature. And here I find myself in New York, and surrounded by all these great architects, and we were, being, this orientation of how, our responsibilities as peer reviewers and blah, blah, blah. And so, I get back to Phoenix, and now I'm a national peer reviewer. Figured, oh, that's going to look good on the resume. Next thing I know, I get an assignment for a land port of entry in McAllen, Texas. And the meetings are in Fort Worth. And so I go, and I'm on the selection committee. I have to go through the RFPs or queues, and narrow it down to a short list. And then the process allows architects to actually, they're paid a stipend to produce the designs, potential solutions, and then those are evaluated, and eventually the contracts are awarded. And again, like you, I didn't know what a land port of entry was until I participated in this experience. And then I was asked to do it again. And then I was asked to do it again. And by 2007, that's when the 54-acre Mariposa Land Port of Entry RFQ was advertised. And it was west of Nogales. So it was an Arizona land port of entry, a commercial land port of entry, which is different from just private vehicles and pedestrians. It's much larger, much more complex, way too many agencies, responsible for inspections, et cetera. And I said to my brother, I said, Neil, we should maybe go after this. We had like 8 people. This is a huge project, and it involves an existing port. There was a land port of entry there that was far outdated, and it needed to be updated and modernized. But anyway, I said, we should go after this. He goes, we don't stand a chance in hell. We've never designed a toll booth or a parking garage. How are we going to be taken seriously, for this massive, civil engineering job? And I go, I think we should do it. And anyway, we were shortlisted. Unbelievably, we were shortlisted with 4 other firms. We were the only firm from Arizona. All of us had to interview in San Francisco. My knees were knocking, and but I'll never forget. Of course, we had to have a peer reviewer too. I didn't know who it was going to be, but I walk in the conference room and there is Larry Scarpa. You probably know Larry Scarpa, right? Yeah. And Larry's sitting there, and the first thing out of his mouth is, Eddie, I really admire your work. And I said, well, this is a great way to start a meeting. and long story short, I mean, Jones Studio, it was the 11th hour. Our checkbook was empty. And now remember, 2008 it had just turned 2008. The recession had not started yet, but Jones Studio, when everybody's doing great, we're sucking, and when we're doing great, everybody else is sucking. I don't know how that works, but that's the way it is. And that fax machine went off saying that we had been selected for the job. Now imagine that the General Services Administration, this behemoth of a department in the federal government, had the courage or wisdom to identify a young firm, an inexperienced firm, but they knew about heat, they knew about the desert, they knew about cactus, they knew about the history of Nogales, they knew the implications of surviving and doing responsible buildings in the desert, and that's all they wanted. They just wanted somebody that had that kind of passion, and we got the job. It totally transformed Jones Studio. We ballooned up to, I think, 24 people, and this was a design bid build, and the recession had hit, and we did the job. It bid $30 million under budget. And I thought, God, I got $30 million to play with. No,
I don't think you get that.
No, in 2 weeks, it was gone. It ended up being a courthouse in Yuma by Stephen Ehrlich. But it took from 2008 to 2016 to complete. And man, was that an experience. I mean, we had to grow up, and which we did, but we never let the intimidation stop us. this is our secret. You can look at any border and you can say, oh yeah, that's the border. It separates the United States from Mexico. But we looked at the border and go, oh, that's the border. That's what connects us to Mexico. And by having that attitude of it as a unifier, a unification, and sort of the symbol of our great or dependent relationship, that's going to produce a different design, and it did. And ports are typically surrounded by razor wire and threatening
Yeah.
barriers, and we figured out how to use architecture and landscaping to define the enforcement zones, to secure the enforcement zones, so we didn't have to use razor wire. But the best decision we made was, it had nothing to do with creating an efficient circulation diagram for all these of the trucks and the private vehicles and the pedestrians. That's a given. I mean, you have to do that, but we had to go beyond that. We had to not only satisfy the serious law enforcement requirements, we had to satisfy the mandate that the United States government had given to us to welcome people to the United States. Here we're trying to satisfy Customs and Border Protection's inspection requirements, which is intimidating and causes anxiety, and at the same time treat people with respect and say, welcome to the United States. We are a dignified country, and this represents the best ideas of our citizens. That's a beautiful challenge, I think. And so we looked at this dusty, hot, barren site and said, it needs a garden. And if people can enter in as a gateway, walk through a beautiful desert garden, that will imply that we respect you and we welcome you. And that's what we did. Okay, so here we have a 54-acre garden, and the small community of Nogales, their water system was already overstressed. So there's no way we're going to be able to tap into that to irrigate this garden. So, and I'll give Brian Farley, my partner, a lot of credit for this, and that's why you should have him on the show. He figured out how to capture all of the water that hit the roofs, all of the water that hit the pavement, channel it to these sunken planters, filter the water, and pipe it to underground storage. The underground storage had the capacity to hold 1 million gallons of rainwater.
Jesus.
Wow.
Now you're saying, but it's the Sonoran Desert. It never rains. You're correct. It rains infrequently, but it does rain. And when it rains, we call them monsoons. And the first monsoon after the port was operational, the first monsoon of the season filled that 1 million gallon tank.
Wow.
And so all the rest of the year, we're pumping water out of that, irrigating the landscape and waiting for the next monsoon season. And I wish you had the opportunity to visit this land port of entry. It is a beautiful garden. And it was so successful. I mean, we turned the model for land ports of entry on its head. And GSA, I mean, they gave us a National Design Award. The AIA gave us a National Design Award. We became the darlings. And so we keep getting these wonderful opportunities to do land ports of entry, and every one of them has a garden, and every one of them harvests rainwater. And the one that's under construction now, south of Yuma, will be the first net zero port in the world, I think. So
That's great. I have a couple questions.
mhm.
The first was, you guys landing that first job, which is huge for the office,
Yeah.
obviously. I'm assuming that the peer review process and Larry Scarpa had something to do with having you guys get the job. I mean, in addition to
I'm sure
obviously
it did. Mhm.
which is another circle back to our previous point of needing more architects in positions of,
Yeah.
of public
Yeah.
policy and authority.
Yeah.
With the design of that particular, the first land port, or even all of them, are there design reviews that take place during the design process, by various agencies? And
Absolutely.
does it ever get
Absolutely.
political or?
No, it doesn't.
Hmm.
So, which also reinforces my comments about it's a peaceful place. And I think, when somebody's running for office and they demean the job that Customs and Border Protection is doing, it makes my head explode. But they're very professional and they're also compassionate. Nobody wants to see someone die in the desert because they ran out of water. And so but I have to admit that, when we did Mariposa and we're talking about a garden, and an oasis, it's like, what the fuck are you talking
Yeah. That's
about?
what I was wondering. Yeah.
But having GSA at our back helped tremendously. I mean, they supported us because they own the buildings.
Gotcha.
And CBP is the user. They rent from GSA. And so, but the project ended up being so successful. The next port we did was a small, I wouldn't even call it a port. We did the pedestrian processing building at San Luis, the one that we're fully modernizing now. But it was like 2016, we designed this 20,000 square foot building just to process pedestrians crossing the border. Why there? Well, here is another interesting story. Yuma, the southern part of Arizona, is part of the Imperial Valley. That's where the Colorado River finally meets the Sea of Cortez. Except the water never gets to the Sea of Cortez because it's all pumped out to irrigate the 250,000 acres of produce that's being grown there. And it has a year-round growing season. And so it's a lot of work to plant and maintain and harvest those leafy greens, the lettuce that you probably will be eating on your salad tonight will have come from there. And Yuma is too small. It doesn't have the labor force. San Luis is even tinier and it doesn't have the labor force. But right next to San Luis across the border is San Luis, Rio Colorado. And that is a very large Mexican community, the sister city of our San Luis. And somehow, here's a shortage of labor in Arizona, a surplus of labor in Mexico. You've got the billion-dollar industry of crops, produce. Somehow we fix the immigration system down there to issue work visas to over 8,000 migrant farm workers to cross the border every morning and return every night. Somehow we fixed the immigration system because capitalism took over.
Yeah, the motivations are there. Yeah.
So, but anyway, that was super successful. And then our next project is in Otay Mesa, which is east of San Diego. Again, David, it's not that hard. When you're working with something that was built in 1973 and has been piecemealed together over several decades to try and keep up with the increased traffic and security protocols and everything else that goes along with it, it's not that hard to figure out what is necessary. And so because of that contrast, we always look really good. And so we fixed that. And unlike Mariposa, which is out in the middle of nowhere, Otay Mesa is the actual southern edge of the little town of Otay Mesa, California. And they had lived with this image of penitentiary for decades. And by the time we finished, they had this beautiful urban street edge, landscaped buildings activating the sidewalk. You didn't even know there was a commercial compound behind it. and public art. I mean, and now what was once a threatening eyesore has become a point of pride. It's great being an architect to have that kind of impact. It makes me want to get up in the morning, as they say. Then the next one, now we're back at San Luis. You know, this is again years later, and now thanks to the Biden administration and the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, we're completely rebuilding the rest of that antiquated port. And because we had set the precedent with our little pedestrian processing building as being a respectful experience, we didn't want to lose that. We wanted to continue that. So and we're under construction, and we've introduced another garden, and you know, and I on my desk right now, you will see me working on another master plan for yet another land port of entry in Arizona. It's the most impactful work we do. And who would have thought that I would be sitting here saying that our best and most progressive client is the federal government of the United
Yeah,
States.
that's really, I mean, there's a lot of lessons to be taken from that, though. One of the thoughts I had as you were speaking was that I think you guys are an exceptional studio for sure, but there are a lot of really good architecture offices out there and a lot of
Mhm.
work to be done in the public
Mhm.
sector or even the
Mhm.
private.
Mhm.
And I just wish that the dots were more connected because they're there. The two sides are there. Buildings need to get done. There's money to do the buildings in a lot of cases, and there's good architects. There's just a misalignment that happens a lot of times. And then we get all this horrible architecture that ruins blocks or ruins streets and ruins cities and et cetera, you know.
Well,
I don't know what it is.
it's the disparity in motivation. And far be it for me to be critical, but developers are motivated by profit.
Yeah.
You know, and if good design is good business, then they will, you know, support good design. But in the end, it's got to make them money, and that's probably not the best reason, you know, to do a very large building. All buildings are large, right? All buildings are expensive, no matter what anybody tells you. So consequently, developers never hire Jones Studio. We did one project for a developer. It was very successful, 100%
Oh.
occupancy, had zero influence in the community, and no developer ever hired us again. That's okay. That's okay, because we're so busy doing public work, whether it's for, you know, Arizona State University, University of Arizona, what have you, you know, different, you know, nonprofits in the Valley. We're lucky we don't have to you know, have that pressure
Yeah.
of only thinking about the bottom line.
Well, that makes me think that more architects should also maybe dabble in development.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I did have a specific questions that you can answer kind of more vaguely is for those types of projects, those government projects, are the fees pretty good on those?
Yes, they
Okay,
are.
interesting.
Mhm.
Hmm.
They're fair, I'll put it
Yeah.
that way.
Okay.
And depending on how efficient one is, depends, you know, dictates how much money's left over at the end.
Yeah.
But Jones Studios, we're mean and lean. You know, we're still
Well, how large are
only,
you guys now? How many people do
I
you
think
have?
we're 20. We're 20.
Nice.
It's exciting.
And I should also give a shout out, as they say, to Victor Gruen's old firm over in Los Angeles. It's called Gruen and Associates. I don't know if you know the name Victor Gruen, but he was a very important architect, you know, back in the late 20th century. He invented the mall. He lived to regret it, but he is credited with having invented that. And he did it for all the right reasons. But Gruen is our partner on a lot of these ports. They have a great
Wow.
bench depth, you know, for production.
Okay.
And so we're usually, you know, the lead designers, and
Mhm.
we're involved throughout the entire project, but we have that, you know, support from Gruen.
Okay, that
We're
makes
a
sense.
great team.
Are they still based in LA?
Yeah, same
Interesting.
office.
Okay, that's
Victor
fantastic.
Gruen's office is still intact.
That's awesome. I was gonna say 20 people to do all
That's
the
a lot of
production. That something
manpower.
doesn't make sense
Well,
unless you guys just don't sleep. I don't know.
I know when we did Mariposa, it was just us. I
Yeah.
can't believe we pulled it off. It damn near killed us, but we did it.
Would you guys ever consider? I mean, you have this great partnership with Gruen, so I'm sure that's fine. But would you guys ever consider doing the production in-house? Or actually, another question that came to mind, maybe for smaller scale work, did you guys ever think about becoming design build, given your initial experience in construction?
Uh, eh, I'm always open-minded, and we do a lot of design build now. It's not Jones Studio as the builder, but this may surprise you, but when I talked about Mariposa being design bid build, that was the last time that happened. After 2016, everything became design build, and and it was when we and it although it was well intended, it quickly became obvious that it was not fair because their
Sorry,
deliverables
the design build or the design bid build?
design build
Okay.
because GSA was requiring, first of all, you had to have a team of general contractor, architects, all the consultants. You had to assemble your team,
Yeah.
and then the contractor would hold the contract, and therefore the architect is the subcontractor to the contractor.
Yeah.
That's okay if you have the right team, but their deliverables were pretty much design the whole thing, do the construction documents, guarantee a price, and we will pick the firm from there. Well, but if you have 40 consultants and all this manpower being, to go through these pursuits, you can push $1 million investment. And if you don't get the job, you're screwed.
Mhm.
And if you're a firm of our size and not get the job, I mean, you can go out of business.
Yeah.
And what happens is you don't ever do it again. So, and Neil and I got behind it, Julie Snow and Matt Kralik, that we were competing against them on Otay Mesa. They didn't get the job, and it was damaging, financially damaging. And we stood with them and we said, this is not fair. What's going to happen is you're going to only get the very large architecture firms competing, and all the wonderful, creative, committed, passionate firms are going to run in the other direction. So, and they did pay a stipend, but you can't split a stipend 40 ways and have it be enough compensation. So they're trying to do better now. They're trying to make the system more fair. Fortunately for Jones Studio, we've never lost one of those. So
Get out of here.
knock on wood.
Good for you guys.
Yeah.
But that is another angle or another aspect of these types of projects when essentially you have offices competing. It takes massive amounts of resources to put together proposals. These are not quick concept sketches, napkin sketches. These are very, very serious,
very developed.
Hundreds of people sometimes.
Yes.
It's tough. It's really tough. You guys do a pretty good variety of work, and clearly the projects the land ports of entry projects and other similar ones have great social value and meaning to you. I'm guessing that you do different types of work because you just enjoy designing different types of things. I don't know if I have a question really so much. It's just that,
but I'm very proud of the fact that we have a wide diversity of building types. If architecture is if that's an ideal and a goal, we're in. We don't care. Yeah, we started out doing outhouses and public restrooms out in the middle of the desert, but we loved every minute of it. And but the most fun I have is when I can design someone's personal residence. I live in a house I designed. Lisa and I are very fortunate. We have a couple of houses I've designed, And but they're few and far between. If the phone rings and somebody wants to talk to me about doing a house, I'm darn sure interested in it. But it's getting harder and harder. The cost of construction and the permitting process. I have a house on the boards now. We're on our second year, and I have yet to complete schematic design because I can't get past the HOA or the Hillside Review Board
Yeah.
of City of Phoenix. I will eventually, but it's frustrating.
It becomes difficult because the number of projects that are viable, I guess, or that can happen just dwindles down because the cost is prohibitive.
Yeah.
The time is prohibitive, and it takes nowadays it takes like a very special client, a very fortunate, wealthy client also, but a very special individual to want to see it through, a 5-6 year process for a house sometimes.
Well, this example I just told you, it's an anomaly. It's doesn't have, but I've had some really, great house designs that have fallen through because we just couldn't, the cliche about getting 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. I mean, I'm pretty good at doing that, but I can't make the bag weigh less. It's
it's sometimes I tempted to just go out there, start building it myself. Like just build it. The land is there. Let me build it.
Yeah.
One of the hour and a half went by super quick, and we could go on for another hour and a half for sure.
Sure did. Yeah.
As you probably know, one of the final questions we always like to ask our guests is, what is your favorite building?
In the world?
In the world. It doesn't have to be one of your own.
Easy question for me.
Really?
Darn right. The Sagrada Familia.
Oh, that is the
man, most beautiful building I've ever seen. And I've been going to see it for the last 20 years, and every time, something else is, complete. And I lay on the floor and look up and tell me that's not one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. I love it. I love Gaudi's work. I mean, it's so from the gut.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't teach someone how to be Antonio Gaudi. You can't teach somebody how to be Bruce Goff either, by the way. And but it's just this, this passion for beauty just bubbling up inside someone and finding an outlet, and and then it manifests itself in brick and mortar and ceramic, and it gets under my skin, just like Falling Water got under my skin. It's as if it's a physical thing as opposed to a sensation.
That's great. I think they're finishing. I know they're planning to finish with the tall spire.
Oh yeah.
So you're gonna have to go somewhere else for the next few years because
they've set a date actually, and I remember the date. Like 2030, I don't know, something really soon. I was like, wow, that's going to be a lot of work to do in a short period of time.
And if it's not enough just to see the building, you can get into those towers and you can climb those spiral stairs all the way to the top, and those little bridges that connect the spiral, you can stand on those. I mean, I can't believe it's legal. I can't believe they let people do that. But
well,
you can.
That is the thing, though. Like, if this was built in the U.S. today, it wouldn't be looking like that.
No, I know.
Railing everywhere and ADA ramps and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. Oh, knowing Antonio Gaudi, he would have figured out a way around it.
Probably. But that's a great one. And I like your observation or your point that it's like from the gut, and there's a purity to it. It's unadulterated. There's not all these other kind of external, sometimes superficial forces that are just impacting the architecture too much. It's just what it was meant to be. It feels.
Have you ever been there?
I have, yeah.
Did you go to the basement and see the models and how they figured all of those shapes out without a computer?
Yeah, the suspended string and the weights and a mirror was the.
And then to cut a bevel on the side of an egg. to get an oval.
It's really cool. It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Eddie, thank you so much for making the time on a Friday to chat with us. This was a lot of fun.
My
the
pleasure.
Next time we're in the Southwest, we'll have to meet up. We were there
Yes.
last year for a
Road
big
trip.
road trip. And had we known you at that time, that we would have stopped by, but the next time we'll stop by for sure. We'll catch up.
Please do. I'll show you all the secret places in the valley.
That sounds great.
Okay. Thank
So,
you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can just log in. You probably already logged in. Just tap review and write a review. You can also rate us on Spotify and YouTube, where you can find us as well.
Yeah, and we have the website, of course, secondstudiopod.com, where all of the episodes are there. We're on social media, really mostly Instagram. We post pretty much every day or every other day, so make sure you check that account out and, share or follow along. We have a lot more guests coming up, so get excited. Keep listening, keep sharing.
Well, oh, yes, we have a hotline, which is 213-222-6950. So you can text or call that phone number, and it will go to voicemail. So if you have any guest suggestions or topic suggestions, maybe you're an architect and you want us to talk about something, or maybe you're not an architect and you're like, could you please talk about this
Something
aspect
else.
of architecture? Yeah, or I don't know. Again, I keep suggesting dating advice. No one's reached out with dating advice yet.
Dating advice?
Yeah, asking
what do
for
you know about dating advice?
I know a little about everything.
Oh,
It's just-
okay. So yeah, just send us your random suggestion about random life issues you're having.
Absolutely.
And David would do some free consultation online.
Yep. No, not free.
Oh, not free. Okay.
Architecture consultations free. Dating advice, not free.
No, okay.
That's the policy.
That's what the expertise is, right?
But thank you, everybody, for listening. It means a lot to us. We're going to keep it going. Lots of great guests coming up. Super excited for the rest of the year. And we'll talk soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.